Have you ever wondered what it really means to own Bitcoin? Many have heard that it's a fully digital currency with no government issuing it, no banks managing accounts or verifying transactions, and that nobody knows who truly invented it. But most people don't understand what Bitcoin ownership actually means at a fundamental level. To answer this question properly, and to make the technical details behind this answer engaging, let's walk step by step through creating your own version of Bitcoin. We'll start by tracking payments among friends using a shared ledger, and then, as your trust in friends diminishes and you become clever enough to implement some cryptographic ideas to eliminate the need for trust altogether, you'll end up with what we call a cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is simply the first practical example of cryptocurrency. Today, thousands of others exist that can be traded against traditional currencies. By following the path of inventing your own Bitcoin, you'll be well equipped to understand new players in the game and the reasons behind different models. A simple shared ledger. Let's begin with something practical and simple: digital records and signatures. If you and your friends frequently exchange money, sharing restaurant bills and such, exchanging cash might become inconvenient. So you might create a shared ledger to record all the payments you intend to make. Alice will pay Bob $20, Bob will pay Charlie $40, and so on. This ledger would be public and accessible to everyone, like a website where anyone can add new lines. At the end of each month, you'd all meet to review the transaction list and settle up. If you paid more than you received, you put money in the middle, and if you received more than you paid, you take money out. The rules for joining this simple system might be: anyone can add lines to the ledger, and at the end of each month, you'll meet to settle the accounts. The trust problem and digital signatures. But there's a problem with this public ledger. Since anyone can add lines, what prevents Bob from writing, "Alice will pay Bob $100" without Alice's consent? How can we trust that these transactions represent what their senders intend? This is where cryptography enters with digital signatures. Like paper signatures, the idea is that Alice should be able to add something next to a transaction, proving she's seen and approved it. And it should be impossible for anyone else to forge this signature. At first glance, digital signatures might seem impossible. After all, whatever data makes up the signature can be read and copied by a computer, so how do you prevent forgery? Here's how it works. Everyone creates a public key and private key pair. Your private key, sometimes called secret key or SK, is something you keep to yourself. As the name suggests, your secret key is something you never share. Unlike paper signatures that look the same regardless of the document, digital signatures are much stronger because they change with the message. They appear as a string of zeros and ones, typically 256 bits, and any slight change to the original message completely alters the signature. To be more precise, creating a signature uses a function that depends on both the message itself and your private key. Your private key ensures only you can create the signature, and since the signature depends on the message, no one can copy your signature from one message to another. Besides this function, there's another function that verifies the signature is correct. This is where the public key comes in. This function simply returns true or false to determine if the signature was created using the private key associated with the public key you're using for verification. Improving our ledger system. Digital signatures have eliminated a huge trust element from our initial protocol. But even with this, you'd still rely on honor and trust that everyone will show up at month's end to settle debts. What if Charlie accumulates thousands of dollars in debt and then refuses to show up? The only reason the monthly settlement is necessary is if people borrow too much money. Maybe you have a clever idea to avoid settling debts with cash, as long as you have a way to prevent people from spending beyond their means. Perhaps everyone starts by putting $100 in the middle, and the first lines of the ledger would be: Alice has $100, Bob has $100, Charlie has $100, and so on. Now, you only accept transactions where people spend within their recorded balance. This means verifying a transaction requires knowing the previous transaction history. This is somewhat true in cryptocurrencies as well, though there's room for optimization. Interestingly, with this step, we've removed the connection between our ledger and physical dollars. Theoretically, if everyone used this ledger, you could go your whole life sending and receiving funds through it without ever converting to US dollars. From ledger dollars to cryptocurrency. To emphasize this point, let's refer to the values on our ledger as ledger dollars, or LD for short. You're completely free to convert between ledger dollars and US dollars. Perhaps Alice gives Bob $10 in person in exchange for him adding and signing the transaction. Bob will pay Alice 10 LD on the public ledger. But such exchanges aren't guaranteed by the protocol. They're more like exchanging dollars for euros or any other currency in the market. This is the first important thing to understand about Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency. It's really just a ledger, and the transaction record is the currency. ## the decentralization challenge. So far, we've said the ledger exists in a public place, like a website, where anyone can add new lines. But this requires trusting a central authority. Who owns the website? Who controls the rules for adding new lines? To eliminate this trust element, everyone will keep their own copy of the ledger. When you want to create a transaction like Alice will pay Bob 100 LD, you broadcast it to everyone so others can hear it and record it in their own ledgers. But without modifications, this system would be terrible. How would you get everyone to agree on which version is correct? When Bob receives a transaction like Alice will pay Bob 10 LD, how can he be sure everyone else has recorded this transaction so he can then go to Charlie and use these 10 LD for another transaction? Imagine yourself sitting and listening to broadcasted transactions. How would you ensure everyone has recorded the same transactions in the same order? Cryptographic hash functions and proof of work. This is where we introduce cryptographic hash functions. These functions take any message or file as input and produce a fixed-length string of binary digits, typically 256 bits. The output is called the hash, or digest, of the message. The goal is for it to appear random. It's not actually random, as the function will always give the same output for the same input. But the idea is that even a tiny change, perhaps modifying a single character, completely changes the final hash. The hash function shown here is called SHA-256. The way the output changes when you slightly modify the input is completely unpredictable. This isn't just any hash function, it's a cryptographic hash function, meaning it's computationally infeasible to calculate it backward. If I give you a string of ones and zeros and ask you to find inputs that, when fed into SHA-256, will give you that same string of ones and zeros, you have no better method than guessing and checking. Now, imagine someone shows you a list of transactions and says, "Look, I found a special number that, when I put it at the end of this transaction list and run SHA-256 on all of this, the first 30 bits of the output are all zeros." How difficult do you think it was to find this number? Well, for a random message, the probability that its hash begins with 30 consecutive zeros is 1 in 2 circumflex 30, or about 1 in a billion. Since SHA-256 is a cryptographic hash function, the only way to find such a number is through guessing and checking. So this person likely had to try billions of different numbers before finding this special one. This is called proof of work. And importantly, all this work is intrinsically tied to the transaction list. If you modify any of these transactions even slightly, the hash changes completely, so you'd have to try billions of guesses again to find a new proof of work number. The blockchain. Returning to our distributed ledger case, everyone is broadcasting transactions and we want a way to make them agree on the correct ledger. The key idea in the Bitcoin paper is to have everyone agree on the ledger with the most work done on it. The way this works is that ledgers are organized into blocks, where each block consists of a list of transactions with a proof of work number, such that the hash of the block begins with a string of zeros. Let's say 60 zeros, though we'll return later to a more methodical way of choosing this number. To ensure these blocks have a specific ordering, we'll make a block contain in its header the hash of the preceding block. This way, if you change any earlier block or rearrange 2 blocks, it changes the subsequent block, which changes that block's hash, which changes the block after that, and so on. This would require redoing all the work, finding new proof of work numbers for each of these blocks, so their hashes begin with 60 zeros. Because blocks are constrained to each other in this way, instead of calling it a ledger, we commonly call it a blockchain. Mining and consensus. As part of our updated protocol, we'll allow anyone in the world to create new blocks. This means they'll listen for broadcasted transactions, group them into a block, and do all the work necessary to find a special number that makes that block's hash begin with 60 zeros. Once they find this number, they broadcast the block they've found. To reward the block creator for all this work, when they make a block, we'll allow them to record a special transaction at the beginning stating they received, say, 10 LD from nothing. This is called the block reward, an exception to our usual rules about accepting or rejecting transactions. Creating blocks is commonly called mining, as it requires a lot of work and adds new currency to the economic system. When you read or hear about miners, remember that what they're doing is receiving transactions, creating blocks, broadcasting these blocks, and getting some money for this. For others who just want to use the system for financial transactions rather than receiving transactions, they start by receiving blocks broadcasted by miners and updating their own copy of the blockchain. The main addition to our protocol is that if you receive two different blockchain versions with conflicting transaction records, you should recognize the longer chain, the one with more work done on it. If they're equal in length, wait until you receive another block which will make one of the chains longer. This means that even with no central authority and everyone having their own copy of the blockchain, if everyone agrees to adopt the chain with the most work done on it, we achieve decentralized consensus. And that's it. This distributed ledger system based on proof of work is, in one form or another, how Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies work. Understanding this technology matters, especially as more money flows into cryptocurrencies. While I won't comment on whether this is a good or bad investment, I believe it's useful for people to understand what game they're playing, at least the basics of the technology behind it all.